We're in step number 4 in our journey of light, and coincidentally, we're in chapter 4 of Genesis. Here's what it says. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. And its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. And the Lord said to him, Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of that city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methushael, and Methushael begat Lamech. Then Lamech took for himself 2 wives. The name of one was Adah, and the name of the second was Zillah. And Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the harp and flute. And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Then Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. Wow. This is an explosion of information. Do you agree? Yep. You did your homework? You read this already? And I don't want to have my back to anybody. I would really, Michael, do you have the guts to come sit up here? Because I want you to talk to me. And so if we need to have some more chairs, please do it. As I said, there's an explosion of information, but it's the kind of information that tells you a whole lot without telling you anything. That's good. Sit there with me, Michael. So before I put any parameters around this thing, let me ask you this. As you were listening, hopefully you were listening, what stood out to you in this chapter? What was significant?
Why did he give favor to... Thank you, sir. Why did he give favor to Abel's offering and not to Cain's?
Okay, so the first thing that stood out was the offering situation. Did that stand out to you guys? You noticed that? All right. We're going to talk about that. What else stood out to you? What else was significant?
The punishment? The punishment that's 7 years or sevenfold.
Okay. All right. We'll talk about that. What else was significant in the chapter? Which resulted in?
I don't know.
Okay, she's saying that what stood out here was that Cain got angry. Okay, what else? I mean, there's a pretty significant thing right smack dab in the middle of this deal. What stood out to you, Michael?
The revenge, and someone already mentioned that, the degree of revenge.
And you're talking about Cain.
77-fold.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, you're talking about the end where Lamech.
Right.
Okay, all right. The murder. I mean, that was pretty significant. I mean, it's the first one that's ever happened. This is the first recorded murder, right? So that stood out. We're going to talk about that. What else? I just want to see if y'all's brain clicks like mine does at all. This is John, right? We're glad to have you, John. You're famous already. But we're happy to have you.
I don't know, did anybody say that the Lord has respect for Abel, what he offered to him?
Yeah, Kent brought that up.
Yeah.
That he wanted. Why is that? Why did that happen? So we're going to talk about that, and y'all. So hopefully y'all got some answers for me, because I came here to learn today. Yeah, well, he was at least at best he was elusive. Anything else? Anything? Any other significant point in there? So the offering is significant to us. The murder, of course, is significant to us. And then the revenge factor is significant to us. We'll talk about that. Nothing else stands out to you? Let me ask you this. That chapter, just take the chapter as a whole. How do you rate that chapter? Is it dark? Is it light? Is it encouraging? Is it a downer? How do you rate it? Or none of the above? It seems dark, doesn't it? Okay. I mean, it seems dark to me. Anybody else have a thought about this? Well, let's start then with the first thing that you saw as significant. And remember, I call this children and consequences. Can you see why I called it children? Can you be specific as to why would I pull out of that children? Okay, is that all? I mean, there's a lot of kids in this thing, right? There's a lot of children. And then you agree there's a whole bunch of consequences in this situation. Okay, before we start with the offering thing, let me just say some things that are points of interest. One is this. It is widely accepted. Matter of fact, I don't know if there is anybody that disagrees with this. Probably because the world is so big, somebody does disagree. But in my studies, all the theologians that I've ever referenced agree that the author of Genesis was, does anyone know? Moses. So that Moses is credited for having written Genesis, Exodus, the next book, Leviticus, the next book, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So the first 5 books of the Bible are known as the Pentateuch, which means 5 books or 5 books of law. So here's an interesting thought, observation, if you will. Since Moses is the author of this, he got this information somewhere. And of course, we say, the all the Christians have historically said, well, he got this from God. Okay. Okay, he got it from God. What does that mean? We could spend a lot of time on that. I don't think it'll serve us very much to do that today because we want to get into these other things. But let me just tell you this. Moses, being the author, has received a lot of information allegedly from God. And so he has an agenda. And as the writer of 5 laws, he knows what's coming in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy. He knows what's coming in Numbers because he's the author. He's the guy that's writing it. And so he is setting this story up in a way that will validate things that are to come later. Because, and look, this is not underhanded in any way. This is the license that any writer has. He has an agenda because he's writing this writing is primarily to the Jews. As we continue to go through the scripture, we will find out that all the writers together compositely not only intended for this to be addressed to the Jewish people, but also to the Gentiles. But it would be after the fact. And it'll be in there. We'll read it. I'm not just throwing something out that I think. This is part of the manuscript here. So when we're talking about an offering, we don't have any detail here. We don't have anything to tell us how Adam and Eve related to these boys. We don't know anything about that. We don't know how they treated them. We don't know if they were loving to them, if they were standoffish with them, if they just kind of threw them out and said, y'all do the best you can. We don't know what they did. So while there's an explosion of information, one of the things that's real clear to me is there's a whole lot more not said than has been said. I want to ask you something. Think about that for a moment. Is there any divine design in giving you a lot of information but not connecting all the dots? Is there any divine intelligence in that? And if so, what do you think? You didn't know you was going to have to think like this today, did you? You have to connect the dots for you. I want to tell you that this is my opinion, as I have studied this book for many, many years, I am blown away at how much it doesn't tell me. And it's that way throughout. It'll give you information, but it won't connect the dots. There has to be an underlying reason for that. You know, the Baptists have always referred to it as this, a personal relationship. Then when we get to Exodus and we find out what God's name is, and that God's name is I am, then we become completely impressed with how intimate God is intended to be with each one of us. Every time you say I am, you're saying the name of God. Now Isaiah will tell us, and we'll read it together at some point, way in the distant future, when we get to Isaiah, that we'll find out the scripture says in Isaiah that I am is the name of God forever. That's always the name of God, always. It doesn't change. It's always I am. Now, let me stop and give you a little tidbit of information here. I started reading the Quran. And, how many has ever heard about the Quran? How many knows that it's kind of real volatile in politics today, and that the Quran is a big deal, and that people have been killed for desecrating the Quran? I did not know this, and I thought, it's so funny that people have a lot of thoughts about stuff they've never read. They have never read it. So they have thoughts about it, and they believe what somebody else told them about it. I started reading it, and I'm not that far into it, but I'm like in the hundreds. It's all by verses. I'm 100 and something verses I've read so far. This is amazing to me. Did you know if you had not read this book, the Quran would mean nothing to you? Because the Quran is based on this book. It talks about Mary, Jesus, Moses, the golden calf, but it don't tell you the story. It just references these things. So the Quran is written as on the presupposition that the reader has a working knowledge of this book. I also find it interesting that statistically, the largest religion in the world is, anybody know? No. It's Christianity, by quite a bit. The second largest religion is Islam. The third largest religion is, anyone know? The third largest religion in the world? Well, Catholic is considered to be Christian, so it's part of the Christianity thing. The third largest religion in the world is agnosticism, atheism. Because that's a religion. Just understand. Look up the word religion. Agnosticism / atheism is a religion. That's what it is. It's a formulated set of beliefs. It's the third largest. Know what the fourth largest is? Do you care? The fourth largest, Hinduism. And as far as I know, the only Bibles that exist is this Bible, the Quran, and the Gita, which is the Hindus' Bible. Maybe there are others, but if they are, they're so obscure, I'm not aware of them. That doesn't mean they don't exist. These are the ones. So then after Hinduism, the next largest religion or movement is, you want to venture a guess? Buddhism. Now, there are Buddhist writings. As a matter of fact, there are 8 tenets of Buddhism that perfectly correlate with the 8 Beatitudes of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. They're perfectly harmonious. Matter of fact, at some point we'll do that. We'll take those things and we'll read the tenets of Buddha, the 8 tenets of Buddha, and we'll read that part of the sermon. Would that interest you? And we'll see, look how they. My point is this: it's inarguable that the single person that's come to this planet that has had by far the largest impact on this planet. Does anybody know his name? It's Jesus. It's not even close. There is no other personage in the world that has had the impact on our world that Jesus, the Christ, has had on this planet. Now, it's funny that Christianity is the largest religion in the world. The Jewish thing barely registers. Judaism barely registers. It's like 2% of all religion is Judaism. There are only about 16 million Jews in the world, according to the stats that I found. That's interesting. This is also interesting. Jesus wasn't a Christian. He was a Jew. So in spite of the fact that the Jews occupy such a small portion of the religious breakdown in the world, they have given birth to the strongest, most powerful, largest religious movement on the planet. I'm telling you this because as we're looking at this, there's so many things not answered. And when I talked to Jan as a preview before we got here, she said, why does it even matter? So I had her do that research for me. She's the one that gave me all those stats off of Google. And I said, now do you understand why it matters for us to look into this book? Let me give you some more information about the book. Harry Potter sold, multiple millions, maybe into the billions of books. What are some other bestsellers that you know of? Do y'all read? You like to read? You like? John Grisham was on the bestseller list for a long, long time. Every time he writes a book, it goes to the top. Bill O'Reilly has written all kinds of books that have hit number one on bestsellers lists. The Death of Reagan, The Death of Lincoln, or who is? Am I saying it right? I'm probably messing it up.
Something like
Yeah.
that. Lincoln book.
Yeah. All of his books have. So I read this, and so you take it for whatever it's worth. If you add all of the bestsellers up, all of them, the Bible has outsold all the bestsellers combined and still is the number one selling book in the world today. And it's not even close. So
Not on the New York Times list.
it is on the New York
Oh,
Times.
it's on the list?
Yeah, it should. I think it never gets
Oh,
off.
it just stays number one.
That's my understanding. You can check that out and see, but it just stays there. Never moves because it's never out of number one. Does that tell you anything? It tells me that we're living in a world that we're approaching, or if we're at about 8 billion people now. Am I right? The population is about 8 billion. And no matter how fast we grow, here's some other trajectories that the stats show. The stats show that by 2050, Islam will be the largest religion. It'll be larger than Christianity. We'll see if that's true or not, but that's the trajectory shows that now. It also shows that what you may have heard, that religion is on the decline. The stats do not show that at all. They show that religion is on a fast growth trajectory, and that the one part of religion that is not significantly growing, as a matter of fact, it won't even stay up with the growth of the population, is agnosticism and atheism. It's on a decline according to the trajectory. So people have worried about things, and we worry about things that we're wasting our time, we're wasting our energy worrying about it. As we explore this, as we continue to study the Scripture, I hope that something will happen to you that will cause you to realize if you're waiting for somebody or some book to come tell you how to find God, how to live for God, you're going to wait a long time. Because no matter if you go through Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam, and I'm not ready to quote the Quran to you, but I will. I'll bring some things. It's amazing how it is in harmony, so far at least, with this. And none of them can tell you how to get to God and how to live for God. They all have ideas, but there's more gaps than there are fill in the blanks so far in what I've read, and definitely in this book. So we don't know here what Adam and Eve's relationship was to Abel and Cain was. So we don't know if we should do what people are doing today that go to classes and they do this self-discovery thing, and in the self-discovery they cry and they tell everybody that's listening to them cry that it's their parents' fault that they're the way they are. This happens over and over again. If you isolate any of your children, get them away from your parents, they're gonna always tell you that the problem was the way I was raised. You know, and listen, they learn to do it in a very subtle way. It's not like they're bashing their parents. It's just, you know, it's just the way it is. You know, but I'm going to tell you, all the way back to Adam and Eve, every next parent never gets a manuscript on how to raise their children. And every next generation tries to do a better job than the one before. And why wouldn't we? And I think that that's probably happening, at least in a lot of ways. But at the end of it, you don't know if your two children are going to turn out like Abel or like Cain. You don't know. We were looking at Cash. We had him yesterday. And we just love, he loves us, and he's just sweet and toddling around. I said, we don't know what he's going to grow up to be. I mean, we have desires and wishes for him. But all through the Scripture, we're going to see this over and over again, that parents had desires for their children. Sometimes children lived up to the desires of their parents, and most of the time they don't. Is that good or bad? What do you think? Okay, that's a good answer. Does anybody else have a different point of view? No? Y'all just going to let her have it? She's going to have the whole thing, and that's the way it is? So I know what you're up against, Kent. She said it, that's the way it is. I see it as good. And let me tell you why I see it as good. I see it as good because when children do not live out their parents' desire for them, they are actually living out their own life. And children that live out their parents' dream, unless it is also the child's dream, and that can happen, it does happen, then we're losing authenticity. If I ask you this right now, how much of your life do you live the way you do because you are concerned about what other people think about you? I'm closing my eyes right now so that I will not embarrass you with my look. How much of what you do is because you are concerned about what other people think? And how much of what you do is actually authentic? And that you're not being mean, but you don't care what people think. Now, a lot of people say, I don't care what people think, and they're lying. Because the next thing they do is obvious they're doing it because they care what people think. Should we care what people think? Yes and no. I mean, we shouldn't go through the world as a-holes. I mean, what's the benefit or the point of that? But at the same time, if we are living our lives because we're concerned about what other people think about what we're doing, we're not real. We're fake. We're replicating something else. And the ironic thing about it is the persons that we're concerned about what they think, they're doing the same thing. So it's so second hand, third hand, fourth hand by the time it gets to us, we don't even know where it started. I was asking Linda today before everybody got here if she'd been laying any brick. You know what her last name is? The Masons. And if you've done any genealogy studies, you find out my first cousins are the shoemakers. And they trace their deal. Well, they got their name because way back there, their progenitors they made shoes. They were cobblers. They were masons. They laid brick or stone masons. That's how that name came about. That's what people did. Listen, it's all in the Bible. We'll find it over and over again. When we get into names and seeing what the value of names, it's because they were named either based on what they were intended to do or because of what they did. It's really interesting. Do y'all think I'm just out on a goose? Huh? I'm so sorry that you didn't.
I thought you were trying to punish me. I feel like I'm sitting
I
there
thought
talking with the teacher.
I thought you were being funny with me. I just meant for you to sit up here on the front row. I didn't know that you thought I actually meant to come sit by me.
I did.
Well,
So can I go back and sit over there now?
you can if you want to, but I've really enjoyed having you here.
I can take better notes.
This is my good friend Michael. He misunderstood me. Hey, you know that's a good example of how conversations go. I had no idea that he was going to come sit by me. I thought he was saying, "I'll show you. I'll just come sit right by you. You want me up close? I'll just sit right by you." But he thought I meant that. Is it any wonder that married people get things crossways, sometimes because you said something and she thought you meant, and you didn't no more mean that than the moon's made out of blue cheese. Let's get back to this offering thing because I've got some questions for you. Since we don't know what the conditions were, the question was asked, why in the story does God reject Cain's offering and accept Abel's offering? What do you think? What are your thoughts? Go ahead.
I think it was more in line with his plan of how he was going to redeem people back to himself, starting with the law, where they had to kill animals, shed blood, and he had to apparently do that when he made clothes for them. I mean, those animals, he killed some animals. He didn't say that, but it's implied when he made clothes for Adam and Eve before they left.
Well, that's an interesting observation because if you'll remember, when we first encountered Adam and Eve, and they started their downward spiral in their thought processes, they tried to make some clothes for themselves out of fig leaves. And then when according to the story, God came on the scene, he made them clothes out of animal skins, which I think would require the death of the animal. So then Cain's not the first murderer, according to this story. God is. And if he did, then there's a real smell problem with these clothes. So, listen, I'm interested in your observations, and that's an astute observation because that little things that just get glossed right over, when you're reading this, because if you're not paying, there's so much stuff in here. Listen, we could spend a year in this chapter alone, and I'm not exaggerating. There's so much stuff that we could talk about in here. So, with regard to the offering, her take is that because of God's plan, that Abel's offering was accepted and Cain's was rejected. Anybody else have a different thought or another idea? What if this is as much of the Bible as we had ever read? What if we didn't know anything past this? If we didn't know anything past this, you wouldn't even be able to have that take. Because you know the rest of the story. That's the reason why I said in the beginning, Moses is the writer and he has an agenda. Now, we can argue whether that was God's plan or not. Moses said it, God told him. Now let me tell you something. Have you ever worked with people? Don't try to second guess me, just go with me here for a minute. Have you worked with people or have you gone to church with people that on occasion came up and said God told them something? Have you ever had somebody try to manipulate you with God told me? Do you like that? It's like when a candidate runs for office in politics and says they're doing it because God told them. If people don't vote for that candidate, they're voting against God because God told them to run. Are y'all here? Do you see that this can be very problematic? And do you see that even how many of you know that Moses was not an angel? He was a man. As a matter of fact, he was a murderer. Are y'all still with me? And he's the guy that said, God said this. I want you to not be afraid before God to take what Moses says with a grain of salt. No, he had an agenda. That does not take away the spiritual benefit from this book and this story. We're going to get some benefit today. I guarantee it's going to help you out of this dark chapter before we leave here today. I'm excited to get to it, but I'm not going to rush. The offering. We don't know the parameters around the offering. We have no information that says it's not good to offer God fruit. Later in this book tells us that God is no respecter of persons. If God doesn't respect persons, why would God respect offerings? So I'm going to suggest to you that it doesn't have anything to do with the academics here. that we've got to look underneath the academics. Let me ask you, has anyone ever given you something and you were pretty sure that the gift was intended to manipulate you? Or has every gift that's ever been given to you always been in your mind, it's just a pure gift? That it's possible. It's possible that every gift that you ever got in your life just came from somebody that just loved you and wanted to give you. There are people in this room right now that give to me and Jan every year, and I'm convinced they love me, and they give to me because they love me. I remember when I first started Daystar Church 30-something years ago, I was in my office on a Sunday morning before church. A guy came in when $1,000 was $1,000, and he had a $1,000 check made out. And he put it down on my desk. He was going to put it in the offering that day, but he wanted me to see it because there was something he wanted me to do. And he was a friend of mine, but I have to tell you, it was very offensive to me. He put the check down where I could see that it was $1,000, and that was a lot of money 30-something years ago. Our church was small, and that was a lot of money. We could really use that $1,000. But then he told me what he wanted me to do. I looked at him, I called his name, I said, "You're my friend, I love you." I said, "You need to take that check with you because I will never pastor based on your offering. Your money can perish with you. I'm not going to be bought." It embarrassed him. And he, "Oh, no. And he ended up giving the money. But he also knew, walking away from there, that what he was telling me to do was for sure not going to be done now. It might have had a chance of being done, but I don't even remember what it was. I just remember this check. I don't remember what it was he was trying to tell me. But he had there was a condition on the check. That's not a gift. That's not an offering. That's a bribe. Is there, what else can you call it? That's a bribe. How many gifts that come under the name of gift are not gifts at all, but are really purchases or illicit bribes? It happens, doesn't it happen all the time? Do you need God to come down and tell you, "Now, I don't accept that"? Or do you already know inside yourself, just like this man that walked into my office knew inside himself, as soon as he got confronted, he knew it was wrong. He didn't need. So, did God tell him it was wrong? Or did I tell him it was wrong? And is there any difference? Are y'all still here? You say, "What? Are you calling yourself God?" I could call myself worse. Are you not an expression of God? Then I must be as well. Sometimes God speaks to us out of a bush that's on fire, and sometimes God speaks to us by a homeless person pushing a basket down the road. Every once in a while, God says something to us through a preacher, but probably less often than you think. What made this offering valid or invalid? What do you think? Now that we've talked, what made it a good offering or a bad offering?
I would say the intention of what was behind it. I mean, you can almost see it coming out as the conversation goes on that, this probably wasn't the purest of all intentions. It was.
What do you think? Don't you think that makes sense? In other words, what am I learning from this? That if I'm going to give, and giving we know is a very important thing. We give to our children, we give to our spouses, we give to our parents, we give to our fellows, we give to fellow workers, et cetera, ad infinitum. We give to people that we consider to be poorer than us. We give to people that are richer than us. We give. Don't we give? So giving is a very important part of our existence. But my attitude is everything about whether this offering is acceptable or not. If I'm trying to manipulate you, I don't need God to come tell me that isn't right. God's already telling me that's not right. Are y'all here? So we learn something real quick here. There's something going on with Cain that's not going on with Abel. Now, is Abel perfect? I'll let you be the judge. After this offering fiasco takes place, Abel and Cain are out in a field talking. And this conversation escalates till Cain can't take it anymore, and he rises up. I don't know if he picks up a rock. I don't know what he does, but there's blunt force trauma. There's something, because he kills Abel and there is blood. So the next thing on our list here is blood and murder. Now, is Abel completely innocent in this? It's possible. There are people that just get mugged for apparently no reason. But they're having a conversation. What are the chances that Abel was being completely nice? He might have been. But would you agree that there's ever a possibility that Abel raised his voice? And Cain, being the older brother, was not having any of it? We don't even know if Cain intended to kill Abel. He hit him real hard. And the result was, now, he did what all the TV shows on TV do right now. Law and Order, CSI. He went and bought some bleach and some black plastic bags. Doesn't it appear that he tries to cover this thing up? Yes or no? Doesn't it look like that to you? Well, let me tell you something about blood. I've got a police officer here today. You can't get rid of it, can you? What is the agent that they put on that reveals blood in black light? What is that? Isn't it a clear kind of a substance? Or you know what I'm talking about. Forensics come in, and when a scene has been bleached and washed, what is it? That sounds right. Okay, I'll take that. We agree with that. Once that's put in the area where the blood was, the naked eye cannot see any blood. It looks clean. It's been bleached. It's been cleaned up. It's gone. You can't get rid of it. We're going to find that throughout this story, blood is so important because medicine will tell you that your life is in your blood. The life is in the blood. So this is one reason why it could be assumed that Abel's offering was more significant than Cain's, scientifically, because there was a higher value placed on what happened with the offering that Abel submitted as opposed to what Cain submitted. But if you walk away from here thinking that God was a being walking around at this time, this book is going to disappoint you later, because this book is going to emphatically later tell you that God is not a being, that God is not a man. But the problem with particularly the Christian religion is that the Christian religion has prayed, has talked, has referenced as though God is a being. And that's the reason why we get into so much trouble and conflict when we read the Scripture. Now you say, well, why did they write it like this? They wrote it like this so that you have to do what we're doing today and go behind these words and say, what is the truth in here for me? Because I don't know how Adam and Eve raised Cain and Abel. I don't know what happened on the day they made their offerings. But I do know when an offering is valid and when it isn't. And some offerings have more value than others. Is there an amen in this room? So we can learn from this, yes? This is applicable to my life. So we've talked about the offering. We've talked a little bit about the blood. I think it's interesting that the story says that God says, you can't hide this thing because the blood's talking to me. Listen, that's what happens today in CSI, in Law and Order and all this. The blood talks. The blood speaks. You can't hide it. You can't cover it up. You can't get rid of it. There is something in you, even physically, that is so powerful that we don't have an agency, not even hyssop, will get rid of blood. You cannot physically be erased. And spiritually, you sure cannot. You are what the Scripture calls the worm that does never die and that the fire cannot burn. I find it interesting that after Cain has been talked to by God and said, you know, the ground is cursed for your sake, you're going to be a vagabond, you know, people are going to want to kill you. And Cain says, yeah, people are going to want to kill me. Isn't it funny in life how that once you get on a downward trajectory, after a while you just become Cain, you say, nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. I'm going to go out into the garden, eat a worm, and die. Don't you get that from Cain? Because you see, once you start that momentum works going down just as much as it does going up. And Cain is just getting worse and worse and worse and worse off. But did he die? No, what did he do? He had a big family. He couldn't farm anymore, so he went out and built a city. I mean, people that build cities are usually a little more in the upper echelon than people who just farm. Are y'all here? So did he get destroyed? I'm telling you, God is for you. The universe is for you. The force is with you. Are y'all here? No matter how dark it gets, the force in you is so phenomenally powerful that when you've named everything against yourself, then you just go out and build a city. And then you have children that become the progenitors of artifacts, artificers of bronze and silver, and musicians. I mean, that's what happened in this one chapter. That's all this stuff that happened. And then, here's how fast bad news travels. Lamech, did you count? You got Cain. Is it 6 generations later? 7 generations. 7 generations later, Lamech. So what does that make Cain? His great-great-great-great-great-grandfather? We don't know what happened, but somebody made him mad because they wounded him, and he killed him. And he's confessing it to his 2 wives, and he says, oh, if it was bad for Cain, it's going to be worse for me. If it was 7 times bad for him, it's going to be 77 times. Everybody, if they're telling a good story, they want to one-up you. If they're telling a bad story, they want to 77 times you. Are y'all here? Is that funny to you? Is that human to you? Isn't that the way people are? And so he says, you just think Cain was bad. I'm bad. I am 77 times bad. We don't know anything else about it. It's just this woe is me thing goes and goes and goes. And let me tell you something. The reason why it matters, parents, how you talk, how you think, what you say around your children, is this is an indication that something you say today can affect people 7 generations away from today. It matters what you say. It matters how you think. It matters how you talk. Anybody else? Because I'm ready to wrap this thing up and let you talk to me on the last and final point that I have. But I don't want to overstep anybody's thoughts. Nothing. Are you glad you're here? Yes. Is this wasting your time? No. Watch this. And Adam knew his wife again. Now here we got all these generations. Now we're jumping way back to Adam. You're going to see. You want your assignment for next week? It's chapter 5. And the subject next week is the death precedent. And you're going to see what we're talking about. It's going to be interesting. Adam knew his wife again. You know, it's just a kind way for saying, you know, they slept together and they, you know. And she bore a son and named him Seth. And here's what she said: God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. Now, here we are, the end of the 4th chapter. They've been kicked out of Eden. And to keep them from coming back in, the story says there's an angel, a cherubim, with a sword that's on fire to keep them from coming back in. But they've taken it as long as they can. And after Seth's son, Enosh, was born, they said, there's got to be a better way than this. We got to get back. And they started calling on the name of the Lord. I'm here to tell you that no matter how dark it gets in your life, no matter how far you think you have fallen, no matter how deep and dark the hole you find yourself in, there is always redemption. There is always a way back. There is always a way up. I don't care if you have been put in solitary in the strongest, most secure prison in the world. There is a way up and there is a way out. You are never completely over. Never. Unless you think so. You're the only one that can doom yourself to death, and death of failure. You're the only one. Nobody else can. Not even, based on this story, God. See, God's not doing that. God is not against you. God is for you. And I don't know about you, but this chapter proves it to me. That when you've lost what you thought was your best, next chapter we're going to find out that Seth looked exactly like Adam. So what is this telling you? That God is already, as soon as they call, God has given them a do-over. The moment you call, the moment you start trying to find that higher part of yourself, the moment you move toward it, it moves toward you. I mean, it's instant. It's the moment you say you care, you want to know, it will move to you. It moves to people who doubt. Doubters that say, I just need God. I had a friend a long time ago. He's passed on now, but he was a young man during the hippie days, and he was strung out on heroin. He was born to a wealthy family. He lived in Austin, Texas. His parents were on a cruise somewhere, and he was at the house by himself. And he overdosed on heroin and must have done it in the kitchen. And he fell, apparently dead, in the kitchen floor right in front of the kitchen sink. I don't remember all the details of what happened, but somehow he survived this overdose, and it took him to such a low place in his life that he ran outside. When he was able to get up, he went outside, and he said it was dark and the stars were out, and he threw his hands up to heaven and he said, God, if you're there, if you're real, talk to me, touch me, help me. And he said, I can't explain it to you, but it talked to me. It touched me. It changed me. He said, I was released from heroin with no withdrawal. His name is Grady Stebbins. He was a great musician. He found his way to a church that's now known as Promised Land in Austin. I don't know what your story is. It won't be Grady Stebbins' story. But I can just tell you that Grady Stebbins said, I didn't believe in God. But he said, I knew I needed help. You don't even have to be a believer. All you got to do is seek. I love them that love me, and they that seek me early shall find me. There is a way back to the tree of life. That sword on fire is not to keep you from the tree. It is to destroy what is keeping you from the tree. Are y'all here? That's what meditation does. It gets you past this. A lot of people just pray and they don't ever meditate. When you pray, you're doing all the talking. But when you meditate, you're listening. And God will talk to you. And God will help you back to the tree. Yes, He will. There is always redemption in one of the darkest chapters of this book, chapter 4, Genesis. It ends with redemption. Because if you ever get a message that's allegedly from God, if it doesn't have a message of redemption in it, it's not from God. Just know that. Every message from God is a way back. Are y'all in love? Do you love God? Whatever God is, do you love God? It loves you. It's for you. Amen? I think we're going to have fun on this journey. This is step 4 in a journey of light. Read chapter 5. Next step's going to be a good one. Are y'all ready? God bless you. Thanks for being with us.